Stuart Grimley is the Upper House member for Western Regional Victoria, and he's also the leader of Derryn Hinch's Justice Party. And Stuart is committed to protecting Victoria's most vulnerable and ensuring that the victims of crime receive the justice and support that they deserve. Now, the former sexual abuses investigations detective says that more needs to be done to protect the innocent Victorians impacted by crime. And with the state election only 4 weeks away, Stuart joins us to discuss the issues of protecting and supporting victims of crime, AusNet, which is huge in my electorate of Eureka, the lack of infrastructure throughout the entire West, and whether or not the West is actually getting its fair share of funding. Welcome, Stuart.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Now, Derryn Hinch's Justice Party, big platform, such an important advocacy that you do, and you've got one of our regulars running in the northern region in John Herron.
Yeah, John's an incredible person, tremendous man, and out of adversity, he's just created these opportunities, I suppose, to help other victims of crime along the journey. And it takes a special person for that to happen. And it's similar to the Morecambs, and today just happens to be David Daniel. Out of adversity, they've created a magnificent foundation of which they're trying to educate young children and families in the community about safety.
Now, Stuart, I understand the need to stop recidivism and to have programs in place to help offenders come out better than what they went in. But has the pendulum swung too far in one direction, and are victims of crime getting the support that they deserve and they actually need?
Yeah, absolutely. In my eyes, in my opinion, I believe that the scales of justice, the image is there for all to see. It's all about supposed to be balance and fairness. But in my eyes, that balance has gone way too far in favour of the offender. Unfortunately, for victims of crime, there's just not enough justice that's happening, not only in the courts, but also after the court process in terms of compensation and restitution. The sentencing, it just doesn't seem to fit the crime on a lot of the occasions. And what we've seen recently, even with the Brittany Higgins trial, it just takes one small stuff up from a juror to abandon the whole court process, which would mean that now Ms. Higgins is going to have to go through the whole traumatic experience once again. It's hard enough for victims of crime, especially victims of sexual assault, to relive their story on the first occasion, let alone on multiple occasions following that. You can only imagine if you've gone through a traumatic event and having to retell that story over and over again, that's going to have an impact on you. And as the defence, as the offender, as we've seen, they don't have to do that. They can just sit there quietly and let their mouthpiece do all the talking.
Yeah. The crimes compensation that we have here in Victoria is sadly lagging behind. I'm not just talking about in monetary amounts, but as far as turnaround times goes compared to the New South Wales system, I think New South Wales, we're talking weeks. Here in Victoria, we're talking upwards of 9 months for an outcome.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And if I hear COVID used as an excuse, I'll spew up, because it's just it's beyond a joke now. It's getting to the stage where victims are honestly coming to us and saying, what's the point? Why? I just don't understand why we should have to put ourselves through this, only to be put through the ringer by some bureaucratic pen pusher in Melbourne. It's just once again, it's another slap in the face for victims.
It's just, again, maddening. The police are flat out. They've got to go on to the next job, and yet they're expected also to provide some sort of support service to the families, but they're that busy that they're off on the next crime trying to catch the next rat bag that they can't deal with the inquiries, or we've got to realise these victims of crime haven't been through the system before and they've got no idea what the court process is going to be like. We really need a system with specific, dedicated support people, don't we?
You're absolutely spot on, and that's something that we started the Victim Legal Service, unfortunately, which the government has taken on board. But unfortunately, in one aspect, that's only concentrating on compensation and restitution. So what we want to do is see that Victims Legal Service expanded to include legal representation or lawyers that can actually sit with victims of crime from the very beginning of the court process to the very end of the court process. Because at the moment, like you said, police, as state prosecutors, they represent the law, they represent the state, they don't necessarily represent the victim. And although they do a tremendous job, their main focus is on the law side of it. Whereas on the defence, the offender has his lawyer, and his lawyer is invested in that defendant. He's not necessarily invested in the law as so much as the state prosecutor is, if that all makes sense. So what we're calling for is just a legal representation that represents a victim of crime along the process, just to step them through. Like you said, they haven't been part, they don't know what's going on a lot of the time. This is all brand new to them. And we have a lot of people come to us and say, we just don't understand when a charge gets withdrawn or when a plea bargain is achieved without their knowledge. They say, we didn't even agree to this, and yet here I am hearing that the charges are being dropped. So there needs to be something.
Yeah, it's great that we've finally got the impact statements that they're allowed to present and tender in court. But I'd also wonder if the system would improve rapidly if they had a impact statement as into how they felt that they were treated through the process, how the police or the system handled their impacts, those survivors that are left behind to deal with it. I think then we may see things improve quickly if the system also was held to account.
Yeah, I agree. And victim impact statements are tremendous, absolutely. But there are occasions when they're actually refused by the court in certain instances, which is just wrong. I think victims should have their voice throughout that process, regardless of if an offender is pleading guilty or otherwise. They should still have that opportunity to voice their feelings, their thoughts about the whole process. I've even heard of situations where a victim impact statement was refused because it was not in the correct format. It was, the family wanted to produce a folder, for instance, which had photographs and all sorts of things in it, but it was rejected because it didn't meet the criteria of a victim impact statement, which once again is another slap in the face to the victims of crime, not only the victims of crime, but also their families.
Yeah, it's like they're an unnecessary burden on the system rather than the actual victims of it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we should be doing more, because I've always said victims of crime don't choose to be victims of crime, and offenders, perpetrators, they choose to be an offender or a perpetrator. So you need to be taking that into account through the court process and recognise and pay respect to the victims of crime and let them have their say and have their voice.
All right, Stuart, let's move on to our area, and my area, the Western region of Victoria. How do you think we're faring with this Labor government as far as infrastructure and their actual attention goes?
Very poorly, Michael, is the short answer. We did a parliamentary budget office report over 12 months ago, which compared the major infrastructure spending on metropolitan Melbourne compared to regional Victoria. Back then, the difference was 11%. So it was 11% in favour of metropolitan Melbourne, of course. I just did one recently within the last few weeks on exactly the same criteria, and now it's blown out to 19%. So the difference between the Melbourne metropolitan spending on infrastructure projects compared to regional Victoria is 19%. That is just astounding. And that doesn't even include the suburban rail loop. So put that in, God only knows what the difference will be between the spending. It's just unfathomable. I just don't get it. Throughout the whole 4 years that I've been involved in Parliament, regional Victoria has really been given the raw end of the deal when it comes to spending, that's for sure.
Yeah, Stuart, I was actually speaking with a journalist from the Herald Sun, bemoaning the fact that our roads and our black spots for mobile phone reception, and he's comment to me, mate, when you live regionally, you expect certain things to, not be the same as they are in the city. And to which I responded, well, hang on, we're removing level crossings in the city to ease congestion. Surely we could then say, if you live in the city, you've got to expect congestion. Where we live shouldn't be dependent. We're after equity. We have that quality of life, and we're not getting it in Western region, despite the massive amounts we put into the GDP compared to the peanuts we get back.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a good point that you raise. It's a bit of a case of victim shaming there, isn't it? Regional shaming. Just because we choose to live in the regions doesn't mean that we should expect to be poorly treated. That's just not on.
Yeah, it could actually be incentivized slightly, I think, Stuart, to take the load off those in the city and to stop having to pile on top of each other. But one of the big issues in my electorate, probably the number one, maybe number two, is the AusNet transmission lines. What are we doing about that, Stuart? How can we get these things stopped or amended to underground?
Yeah, and you're exactly right. It needs to go underground. It needs to go back to the drawing board. They need to consult properly with the community, not just send out a leaflet or a pamphlet or do a tick and flick or have a few community forums. And because it's one thing to have a community forum and listen to the concerns. It's another thing to actually act on the concerns that are being raised, because that's not happening at the moment. There's no action at all on the concerns of the community. Bearing in mind that the community have come to me, the ones that I've spoken to, the rally groups and so forth, have said that they're not against the renewable energy or not against the project itself. It's just they're against the whole process that has gone on. They're against having massive transmission lines running through their properties. They want to see it go underground. They don't believe in the costings that's being bandied around by certain groups. There needs to be an independent valuation done for those undergrounding, and I understand that some councils are also undertaking that themselves, which is fantastic. So let's go back to the drawing board. Let's start again. Take the decision out from Collins Street in Melbourne or whatever it is they're making their big buildings out there, and just drawing a line as the crows flies. That's what they're doing right now. And actually go out there and take a look and see where you can best do this project. Because, like I said, they're not opposed to the project, just opposed to how it's being done.
Yeah, and especially when we see in the UK, as we speak, they're currently dismantling overhead transmission lines and putting them underground. And I can't understand the concept of cutting edge, environmentally friendly, latest technology, connecting it to last century's transmission lines. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely agree, Mark. You get no arguments from me. So hopefully the environmental studies that's being currently underway and won't be tabled until after the election, coincidentally, despite the fact we've been calling it for it to be produced or released prior to the election. That's not going to happen until after the election. But let's see what happens from there. But regardless, this is going to be a big issue in the near future.
And that's what I say to my electorate, my constituents. You vote for Andrews, you vote for that to go through our community. And it might be over your house, it might be over your neighbour's house, it might be over your neighbour's act, but it's through our community. And the disdain that we've been treated with is very reminiscent of when they tried to put the toxic soil out here as well. And the Ombudsman's report found that the EPA did not engage in proper community consultation with the community when identifying sites for it. They just, don't ask them, because of course they're going to say no, so let's just put it there. Yeah,
exactly right. And throughout the whole process, we voiced our concerns about that as well. And there's all sorts of things. However, there were other sort of minor parties in Western Victoria who remained quite silent on the issue, and I'll refer to the Victorian Justice Party, who didn't really speak up too much because they are quite heavily aligned with the government. And fortunately for the community and the strong voices out in the community, that decision was overturned. So good on them for doing that, and it just goes to show that having a community voice and a collective community voice that's loud and clear can quite often get results.
Yeah, and with the Labor government slogan of doing what matters, my slogan is, well, we matter in the West, Mr. Andrews, so pay attention or else. So, Stuart, you've got my vote already with the AusNet towers. How do we stand on the Building Better Regional Fund being scrapped, which has seen pet project of mine? My partner has been raising money since 2014 for the Mirabel Aquatic Centre, and now we're being told that because that fund's been scrapped, we're going to have to reapply through the replacement body.
Yeah, now I put a budget submission into the Treasurer on that aquatic centre in recent times, which which I was proud to support as well. And it's a common theme that I'm hearing as well, Michael, that throughout the regions we're treated second rate, and we'll get over it. We'll learn to do it another way, and which we will. Unfortunately, we have to. But it's another example of how we're just treated completely differently to the rest of the state, completely poorly. So how do we get around it? Well, we get back on our feet, we dust ourselves off, and we continue to fight for the money that's deserved towards us. And same with housing. Housing's a massive issue. There's just not enough housing in the regions. At one stage, the government's sort of encouraging tree changes and moving out to the country and so forth, and we saw that through COVID. A lot of people moved to the country, but you've got to have the infrastructure that comes with that. You've got to have the houses, you've got the public transport, you've got to fix the roads, because they're not getting any better. You need to invest heavily in the regions to make that happen.
And while you're on the subject of roads, that would probably be the number 2, maybe 3 in my electorate that I'm hearing as well. And I'd just like to point out to people, each level crossing that Dan Andrews removes, cost of around $170 million. That's the equivalent of the entire state budget for road maintenance. So we spent 67 years worth of our road maintenance budget on removing those level crossings. And it would be fine if, I'm not saying it's an either or, but it needs to be an and there's no money in the kitty with our record debt level that our children's children are going to be paid for. Some things need to be tolerated, don't they? Like I think they said remove 3 to 10 minutes on a morning or afternoon commute.
Yeah, and there's nothing more important than a life either. And what we've seen, I was just out there yesterday driving out through Ballarat. What I saw was signs, hazard signs, slow down, speed reduction signs, all because of potholes. There was no roadworks happening. It was just all letting people know, which is good. That thanks for letting me know there's a pothole, which is fantastic in certain areas. But if you go through some of the back roads now, which a lot of your GPSs and maps will take a lot of people through now, they'll take them through the back roads, not necessarily on the main highways. Those roads are getting massively chewed up. And if you've got a speed double coming the other way, and it's one of those, more narrow roads, and there's a couple of potholes in there, geez, you're really dicing with death, and you're going to have to really pay attention and have your wits about you, because it's an accident waiting to happen.
Yeah, and not to mention too, under the Roads Management Act of 2004, any damage to your vehicle under $1,400 is on you. And I don't know about you and your electorate, Stuart, down there in the Great Coast, but here $1,400 is enough to sink someone. That's a month's rent. It's a mortgage payment, not having your car, and your car vehicle doesn't, your insurance doesn't cover it. You need special rim and tyre insurance to cover it. It's around $1,100 a year to have that, and we shouldn't be out of pocket. We understand and insist on the need for safety, and not only ours but other people's, to have roadworthy cars. Surely we should have a reasonable expectation to have car-worthy roads that aren't going to damage, maim, or even worse, kill us. It's a reasonable expectation, isn't it?
Absolutely, and we can't be putting putting dirt in potholes. You can't be, it's like I've always said, putting Band-Aid on a bullet wound. It's only going to last for a very, very short period of time before truck or something else goes over it and just goes back to what it was. So you need to fix them properly. You need to invest in the roads properly, and don't just have these temporary measures in place.
And there's one thing for a pothole in a 60-kilometre-an-hour zone, a completely different one to be doing 110 down that Western Freeway or Western Highway and hit one of those.
Yeah, I agree. And with the floods and the water, it's just, honestly, it's really, really tough out there at the moment. So, everyone just pay attention, take care, and unfortunately, we just have to try to avoid them as best we can at the moment, because they're not going to be fixed anytime soon.
Great. All right, Stuart, great to speak to you, and I look forward to seeing you on the hustings. And I love the work and the advocacy you've done for the Western region. So keep up the great work, and hopefully I'll be seeing you in Parliament after November.
That would be wonderful, Michael. I very much look forward to that day, and thanks for having me.
No worries, Stuart. Thank you.